Ya pueden empezar si quieren.
Bueno, buenas noches a todos. Hoy va a ser un poco diferente porque tenemos el honor, the honor, to have here our friends Otto and Elizabeth. Entonces, va a ser en inglés. Lo primero que tengo que preguntar es si alguien tiene algún problema en que sea en inglés, yo puedo ir ayudando o me parece que alguien va a estar también traduciendo ya al fondo. Pero si queréis más bien, para que fluya, mejor que hable él, si os parece, y luego cuando haya preguntas, pues ahí sí que os puedo ayudar a traducir. So we want to thank you for coming here today. Otto is from South Africa, and but he is now working in Cambridge at the Kirby Line Centre. He runs the art program there, and he has a master's in English literature and theology, and a writer, a poet. And a musician and a biologist, although he's very young. And his wife, they've only been married for 6 months, beautiful Elizabeth. She's Texan, and she's just done a master's in art and theology. So I think it'll be very interesting also to ask you some things. Now, I think apart from their background, I think it's very enriching for us to know about what's going on in the world in the art and faith, that apart from what we see very small in Spain, is the fact that we're very lucky because they are Protestants, and as Christians, I think this is an ecumenical gathering on seeing how we're all walking in the same direction together, and we have so much to learn from each other. So thank you so much, and I think the first thing that I would love to do is to pray together, as an ecumenical prayer. So dear Lord, thank you so much for bringing us together. Thank you for Otto. Thank you for Elizabeth. Thank you for their vocation in arts and faith. And please guide us also in this path, so that we may be witness of your love to others. Christ our Lord. Amen. So tell us, Otto, what is the Kirby Line Centre? Because I read that it's public theology.
Yeah.
What is public theology?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. Just first of all, good evening, everyone. It's really great to be here and share a little bit of what we do. And I'll be unable to go into any depth on anything that I talk about tonight, so it'll be a little bit of maybe an overwhelming exposure to a lot of the things that I think about and I do in Cambridge. So, as Maria said, I work for the Kirby Line Centre for Public Theology in Cambridge. It's a whole mouthful, but it's in essence it's a research centre. So we're adjacent to the University of Cambridge, but we're not really a part of it. So we sort of work within that environment, but we're not under the university. And we are creating a community of scholars who are in the field of public theology. So the first question is, what is public theology? But first, let me just look at my slides, because I've just made them. We're a research centre in Cambridge, network of scholars around the world, and we do Christian research across disciplines, practiced in community and rooted in deep spirituality. So that's our little elevator pitch. And whenever I say that to Elizabeth, she just looks at me blankly and says, "Oh, what does that mean?" But we'll go into depth of what all of that means as we go along. But if we move the slide, then we go to your question. Right?
Great.
Okay. So public theology essentially is concerned with thinking deeply about what the Bible has to say and Christian theology has to say about all areas of life. One of my colleagues put it like this: recognizing that Christianity can and should speak to public matters, and that broad questions about life cannot be fully addressed through any one discipline, or concerning anyone's sphere of culture, it draws upon multiple theological disciplines. It addresses a broad range of issues and questions from a Christian point of view. God is the Lord over every square inch of creation. Thus, his self-revelation scales every height and plumbs every depth of the created order. So basically, we work from the conviction that theology is not just about that little part of your life that has to do directly with prayer or with worship, but that the Bible and that the Christian faith has something to say about everything, because nothing is separate from God. So public theology is undertaken from various traditions, whether Catholic or Protestant or Orthodox, across a broad range of approaches and disciplines. So there are public theologians who work in economics, there are public theologians who work in medicine, there are public theologians incoming like me in the arts, and so across disciplines, across denominations. But despite the variations in theory and in denomination, there are certain features that public theologians share in common, that all public theologians share. And among these, I will only mention 4. So if we can move the slide, then... Oh, did I not put down the 4 areas? What happens next? Oh dear. Okay, I'll just mention them here. So the first thing that we recognize as public theologians is that it's not private. In the course of the Enlightenment, from the 17th century, 16th century, 17th century onwards, there became a bigger and bigger divide between theology or religion and public life. That there was an area where you could talk about faith and practice faith, and there was an area for all the rest, basically. Public theology resists this. God created us and everything else, and not only that, he sustains everything. He is present in everything. He did not just create the cosmos, and then stand back like someone who had created a clock and let it run, but he is involved, he's sustaining it, and he's present in his creation. As St. Paul said, that in him we live and move and have our being. So the creation is not something separate from God, and therefore our theology cannot be separate from the rest of our lives. If we're going to think deeply about what we believe, it has to have something to do with what we do outside of worship and outside of the church. Secondly, it is not the same as political theology. We do not see politics as the only area where change can come and where important things happen. Every single area of human life is important and is to be brought under an understanding of. It has to have a theological understanding to it. Thirdly, there's a two-way relationship between biblical interpretation of theology and the culture. So we study the Bible deeply in order to then apply what we learn to our lives and to the world. But it goes the other way as well. We listen very deeply to what is going on in the world. What are people thinking about? What are people concerned about? What are the questions that really need addressing? Then we take those things back to the Bible and we see what does our faith have to say about this? What does Christian tradition have to say about this? And then fourth, and so this is just a kind of shortened list of things that I could say, but we are concerned about the common good. So while there are some forms of theology that are concerned only with Christians and their lives. Public theology works for the good of a whole society. So it's those who share our creed and those who do not. We can think of Joseph in the Bible and the way that he used the wisdom from God to influence public policy so that everyone could benefit. He told the Pharaoh that a drought is coming, so we need to put certain economic policies in place. And this is an example, you could say, of very early public theology. The same way Daniel used his wisdom, his talents, his skills, and his good character to be a force for good in Babylonian society. So that's a little bit of an intro about what public theology is.
Would it be, from what I gather, it's basically bringing God to everything you do and to everyone that surrounds you and whatever. You know, that is basically what we all try to do also in our everyday life. But is it at the same time being the witness talking about God, or you don't really mention Him? It should be your deeds and your behavior that talks about Him.
Well, I think so. There's public and there's theology. And theology cannot be done without talking about God, being deeply rooted in the scriptures, having a confession of faith. So we believe that Christian thinking is robust, that it can stand its ground within public debate. So you don't have to shy away from talking about your faith. That it is an integrated philosophy that can sustain itself. It's not something to hide.
Do you try to evangelize?
So evangelism in the Protestant world can be tricky because, and this is something I'll talk about when we get to the art part as well, but in the Protestant tradition there has over the centuries been a problem, and it's this. It's that, like I said, Christianity has often been reduced merely to a matter of the soul. It's all about saving souls, but what you do on earth, it's secondary. And so, in a sense, we're trying to correct a little bit the way in which the Protestant church went off course, where it was all about saving souls, but what you do with your work didn't matter. And the problem with that is that our work on earth then just becomes a tool for evangelism, and people then struggle to find any meaning. So what you find is that the pastor, the preacher, the priest has an important vocation, but the rest of our work isn't really important unless it's overtly preaching the gospel. And artists especially struggle in this area because the best art, as we know, is sometimes slant. It's not immediately clear. It invites you into mystery. It invites you into something that can't immediately be understood. Now, if we insist on it being evangelism, it can almost dumb it down. It can make it less deep and less robust. Again, if God is the God of all creation, then it is worth thinking about all things. So for us, we prefer the word mission over evangelism, because mission is about how your whole life becomes worship, as opposed to just wanting to convert someone.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like that. Your whole life becomes worship.
Yeah. And so your work has value, not just your preaching.
So tell us how art is a way of worship.
Yeah. I think the best way is to maybe talk about the arts project in KLC.
Right.
If I can go into that. So Maria mentioned that I manage the arts project for the Kirby Lang Center. A little bit more background, as Maria said, I'm a musician. I think I was first a musician and then came into academics later. And while I was studying at Edinburgh, our center was offered the opportunity to take over a website. And this website engages with art from a position of faith. And so I was appointed to begin an arts program. So that entails a research hub, which is for scholars working in art and theology. So we think deeply about what are the theological dimensions of art, whether it's Christian art or not. It's because we're working with God's creation, it's impossible to do something that does not enter into conversation with God. And so, as theologians, we are there to point out, you think this has nothing to do with God, but as soon as you are working with meaning, if you're working with form, because it's created by God and sustained by God, you are engaging in theology. And so that's one way in which you can think about how theology and art interact. In my church, I grew up in a more evangelical reformed society. In South Africa, I met almost no Catholics growing up.
No Catholics.
And part of that legacy is that art in our church has become very poor. That because in the Reformed tradition, there was for a long time a hesitation about visual art. Visual arts were really sidelined from the church. You look at Protestant churches, they don't look beautiful. There are no images except for projector screens. And that is because back in the 17th century, John Calvin and some of the reformers were very skeptical and they equated the visual very often with idolatry. They were very concerned with idolatry, that we would put anything above our worship for God. But very often it went too far. And what started happening is that the art world in the Protestant world developed separately from Christianity. So our tradition of art is very thin often in the Protestant church. Then I moved to the United Kingdom, and that's a different story, because there, even though the Church of England is a Protestant church, it remains Anglo-Catholic in certain aspects. So there is still a lot of Catholic within the church in England, and so you'll see much more beautiful churches, you'll see stained glass, you'll see liturgies that are still intact. So depending on where you are, I mean, Elizabeth, who from the United States, that's where you have the big churches and kind of very contemporary music. Anyway, I'm going on a long tangent now, but so these are a lot of things that we have to wrestle with. And what's very interesting is when I come here, I'm sure that some of the questions are different, because our relationship with art as Protestants is different with the relationship that you have with art. We're trying to rediscover some aspects of the visual arts in the Protestant church. But I'd love to talk a little bit about Artway, if that's okay. So Artway is an online publication that we took over, and it was founded by the daughter of an art historian, Hans Rookmaaker. I'll get to him in a second. So what Artway does is we provide resources to help people understand and enjoy art. Now, first of all, we all know that contemporary art sometimes isn't the easiest thing for someone to understand who comes to it new. And for me, even sometimes it's still challenging. I don't know how to interpret something. And Artway seeks to help people see the depth that is there, but also to understand the riches of the art tradition, especially as a Christian, that we've inherited this beautiful tradition, aesthetic tradition that is theologically rich, is aesthetically rich. So to help people access that. It's to help churches incorporate art. Again, as I say, Protestant churches have very often sort of sidelined the arts, and to help them to bring it back into our services. It's to build a network of people who are engaging in the arts from a Christian perspective. So it's to do things like this, to be with you, and also to foster a community of writers, people who are thinking about art, to write for us and to start conversations. And then lastly, to shed light on those artists and the places where good art is clearly in conversation with Jesus, declares the glory of God, and inspires devotion and Christian formation. So that's Artway. We can move the slide. Yeah, could we have a look at the website? Okay, so I just want to show you the website. So, we took over a very outdated site. It was started in 2009, and maybe if we could just scroll a little bit. We publish visual meditations, shorter pieces on specific artworks, longer articles about art all around the world. If we can go to the About page, and then just scroll down. Yeah, so 2,500 articles in the library, 900 artists, 80 countries represented. So this is a long project in coming, and in the Netherlands it's been declared UNESCO Digital Heritage. So it's an important website, and part of its importance is the legacy that it was built on. So if we can go back to the slideshow. Yeah, so it was founded by this Dutch lady, Hans Rookmaaker, and she is the daughter of, next slide, Hans Rookmaaker. Now, Hans Rookmaaker, as you can see, was kind of worked from the early part till the late middle part of the 20th century. In Dutch, his name actually means smoke maker. And he always had his pipe. He was a real charismatic character. And he was a very important person in bringing an awareness of how important it is to pay attention to art into an evangelical community that was largely just ignoring it, saying, well, this is kind of weird, and it's in the 60s, it became even weirder to everyone. So they just said, look, let's just leave that to the culture and we'll do our Christian thing. But Hans was a very important person in saying, no, if you pay attention, you will understand how people are thinking about things. What is the underlying belief system that is informing art? He started teaching people that you can read an artwork, that you can look at it, and you can understand how they think about the world. So, yeah, we can move next slide along. Again with this pipe, as you can see. And so, a great way to get into the legacy of Hans Rookmaaker is this quote of his, and it contains a lot of what I've already been saying. It's that Christ did not come to make us Christians, he came to make us fully human. Now again, that is kind of resisting this urge to say art has to evangelize. He's saying that Christ doesn't just come to change our language and to get us a ticket to heaven, but that our whole lives are meant to be transformed and to become our service of God and our service to the world. And this was radical for the evangelical church, especially. Yeah, we can move this slide. So Rookmaaker brought a biblical Christian perspective on art history. And essential to his view was Genesis, that God creates the world and he says it is good. And so if you really think deeply about what does it mean that God says the world is good, especially in a lot of Christian thinking, there's a Greek Gnostic type of thought that crept in, which said that the material world is the problem, and we need to escape it, and that we need to escape into the realm of the ideal. But if we read the Genesis account, we see something different. That material is the plan. It's not something to escape from. And when we see Christ and his resurrected body, we see this as the first act of recreation. That God's plan is not to destroy his handiwork, but to redeem and to bring new creation, to recreate. And so this is the cornerstone of Hans Rookmaaker's approach to the arts, is that if creation is good, then art is important. And as I said, this statement of his, that Christ didn't come to make us Christian but fully human, he said that in the context of art, because a lot of people saw art as less important than preaching the gospel. So if we can move that slide. His other important work, and the title of the work is important, it's Art Needs No Justification. Again, that art is always in danger of being co-opted by something else, that either it serves a propaganda purpose, or it serves an economic purpose. It becomes a commodity just like any other. But in the church, the big problem was it became just a tool for preaching. So once you've got the message across, the artwork can be disposed of. It's about the inner meaning. But the problem with that way of thinking is that the meaning is not separable from the medium. That there isn't just an idea that can be extracted from an artwork. The message is in the form. So art needs no justification. We can move that slide. So I've mentioned the problems that evangelicals have faced in being involved in the arts. It's on the one hand that religious life is seen as separate from the rest of life, so the artist doesn't know where his art fits in. The second thing is some difficulty with the Reformed tradition, that art is seen as, or visual arts are seen as dangerous. But for Rookmaaker, this statement, art needs no justification, is not the same as art for art's sake, which is something that we've been hearing since the 19th century. Art for art's sake makes art the highest thing. It becomes, art is the most amazing, most important thing. In the 19th century, in Romanticism, we started seeing that art became a religion in itself. And I think Rookmaaker is not only trying to tell us how important art is, but he's also trying to tell us art can never be the most important thing, that it has to find its place within God's good creation. So art needs no justification. This is my interpretation, because art has already been justified. And the justification for art in the final analysis, I think, is love. That Rookmaaker said, just like you don't have to, a tree doesn't derive its value from the fruit that it gives you, or the wood that you can make from it. It has a value in itself, because God created it. So art, because it is part of how we were made, doesn't need to be justified. But we also know that that everything we do becomes if we are a Christian, can become an expression of love for God and for His creation. So that's a little introduction to Hans Rookmaaker, and so Artway tries to take that form and continue that in this way.
Artway is, I met Marlene in 2011. We did, it was the youth gathering with the Pope in Spain, and we did artist reunion, and she came to tell us that this had just started and to bringing together Christian artists from all over the world. And so it was like a head start having the Catholics be part of our program. And it was very interesting because this website that I welcome you to be part of, it shows you artists around the world that want to express art from a Christian perspective. or sometimes a works of art and how you would look at that work of art from a Christian perspective. But it's very interesting because she uses a lot of African artists I've seen, and perhaps it's you, because now you're running that website.
Yes.
Because now he's in charge of this website worldwide. So we're very lucky to have him.
He still edits the Dutch side,
Yeah.
and I'm in English.
But it's very interesting because it's like nowadays, with internet, it's wonderful because we can have a platform where you can see artists from all over the world and from different Christian backgrounds that they all want to express the presence of God through art.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for taking this role, and I hope as Spanish artists we can also help you and feed your website.
Yes.
And have the Catholics have the presence there also. It'll be wonderful.
Definitely. I think we can, if we can go to the next slide, and the next one. So another of Rookmaaker's important works is this one called Modern Art and the Death of the Culture. Now it sounds very gloomy, but what he does here is he traces how art changes from the 17th century, actually before that, to the present day. And if we can skip to the next one. The question, you could put it like this: how do we get from here to here? For a lot of people, that is a real urgent question, is what happened? How do you understand this? Is this something to ignore? Is it something to be afraid of? Is it something that we can participate in? And Rookmaaker is doing very careful work in understanding this. So he traces the intellectual history of the West from the Enlightenment and how that influences art through to the 19th century and to see how intellectual thinking is expressed in the arts. And a lot of people say that he was a bit negative about it. Essentially, he kind of says that art became completely separated from ideas and from ideals, and so started developing too separately from Christianity. Christians stopped participating, and so the two became incomprehensible to one another. But he's an advocate for participating. He says Christians have to participate in order to show that there is meaning, that there is something deeper behind things. So just two quotes to kind of give a sense of where he's coming from. Culture is the result of human creative activity within God-given structures. So you cannot do anything in the world without doing it in God's world. There can never be something that's completely apart from faith. All our work is ultimately directed by our answer to the question of who or what our God is, and where for us the ultimate source of reality and faith lies. This is just as true for those who do not acknowledge the true God of the Creator. Their cultural activity is colored by basic non-Christian faith. So Rookmaaker is interested in tracing what are the ideas. One of the possible problems what we could find with Rookmaaker's approach is that he boils things down to thinking, to ideas. That everything is an expression of what we think, and to be a Christian is essentially a matter of thinking. And recently there's been a big shift in evangelical theology towards saying, but hold on, we are not just thinking things. We have bodies and we have habits, and the beauty that we see shapes us just as much as what we think. So there's a very important book that I commend to you by James K.A. Smith. I think I have it somewhere on the slides. So it's the previous one. There, no.
Can I then another book,
Yes.
Theology of the Body, John Paul II.
Yes, yes.
And I think that would also be interesting for you to expand on the wonders of the richness of our body as unwrapping the sacredness, and everything is sacred into what we do, what we touch. And,
Yes.
so theology of the body is something you should, I'll tell you, Christopher West.
Mm-hmm.
That's an American. Do you know him?
Yes, I've read it. Yeah, he's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, no, but it's great that we feed each other.
Yes. Absolutely. So, just to kind of look at Rookmaaker's model, is that Rookmaaker, there was a whole trend of people who started looking at kind of intellectual history, and they said that the story of our culture is basically secularization, that we moved away from Christianity. There's some interesting books that came out, but more recently, that narrative has started changing a bit. So Charles Taylor's book, what is the book called again?
The Secular Age.
The Secular Age.
Just
Yes.
like the Canadian.
Yes, he's a Canadian philosopher. He says something similar. He says that after the Enlightenment, we were led to believe that all there is material. There's nothing more than what you can see or what you can basically test in a laboratory. And what that means is that we are locked in to what he calls the immanent frame. Rookmaaker calls the same thing, man in a box. That there's nothing outside of ourselves. There's only creation, and later in philosophy we find there's not even something outside of us. There's only what we perceive. That we can only really know what our senses tell us about the world. But Charles Taylor said that if you pay close enough attention to the world, you will see that there are cracks in this frame, in this dome, this philosophical dome that tells us that there's only the created world. And if you pay enough attention, you see it in art, especially contemporary art. You find these spiritual elements, and it tells you that we are really haunted by God, who we thought was dead, but he makes his appearance in people's longing for him, in people's longing for something more. Another very important book that came out in the past 20 years, so I think probably 10 years ago, is Tom Holland, who's a historian, not a Christian. The book is called Dominion. What Tom Holland does is he shows that so much of what we think, what we take for granted in Western culture, that we think is just self-evident, something like human rights, for example, that we have rights and that is basic and it's a self-evident truth. Actually, it comes from Christian tradition. So Tom Holland complicates things. He says, well, we think we're moving away from Christianity, but we're actually still drawing on Christian principles. We are using, there is actually no basis for saying that humans have rights if we aren't made in the image of God, philosophically. So Tom Holland's book also complicates this narrative that we are just moving away from God. So these are just some interesting shifts that are happening, and what has happened since that book is it's become much more acceptable to talk about Christianity in intellectual circles, to say, well, it's actually derived from the Christian tradition, these assumptions that we have. And so Christian thinking is re-entering the intellectual sphere in a very interesting way. And then, as I said, practice and thinking. Some of you may have seen the very popular book called Atomic Habits. Yeah. And there's another one by something to do with the power of habits. So this became really popular in self-help literature, in psychology, that habits are really how we get around in the world. And this brought another big shift actually in the Protestant world, because for a long time Protestants think anything that is a repetition, is a ritual, isn't sincere, because you're not thinking. and your thinking you have to mean it. You have to be sincere about what you're doing. Otherwise, it's just empty religion. This is a very Protestant type way of thinking. Now, James K. A. Smith draws on this literature of habits to say, but hold on, we don't just think about everything we do. Actually, we have habits, and our habits change us. The more I practice something, the more automatic it becomes. If I practice good actions, and my good actions become automatic, I'm becoming a more virtuous person. And this turns the narrative upside down. When Protestantism, you have to mean everything, you have to be sincere. There is a type of ethic, there's a way of thinking where you could say, if I do good things without thinking about it, it's actually even more righteous than my left hand knowing what my right hand is doing. Now the arts are very important in this, because the arts speak to our senses and to those areas of us that bypass the intellect, what we think and how we reason about things. That it enters a deeper emotional part of us. It changes essentially our desires. It draws our desires. We're not led so much by our heads, we're led by our gut, by what we want. So this idea that we act more on desire than on what we believe very often. And if the arts can show us that there's something more beautiful to desire, then our affections are being prepared for Christ, which is the saying by, who's the philosopher? I don't know, but there's a Catholic philosopher who said that the arts are the John the Baptist of the heart, preparing our affections for Christ. So essentially, the arts teach us, show us what is beautiful, what is to be desired. And I think Christian artists have a very important role to play here, to say, you're desiring something and that thing is good, but it's not good enough. There's something even better. So it's not to say what you're desiring is just nonsense. It's just like, it's good, but there's something even better, even more beautiful, even more glorious. And so and the arts have a way of doing this that no other thing can do. So
I love that.
Yeah.
Arts is the John the Baptist.
Art is, yes.
That's interesting.
Oh yeah.
You're right, Mark.
Yeah, it was actually Jacques Maritain who was the one that I think. Yeah. Do I have another slide? I don't know where I am in my notes. Okay, so I don't know if we need to get into my academic work. I don't know if you want to maybe
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely great if you have any questions.
Yeah.
I'm happy to translate. Have you all understood, more or less? I think it's so interesting for us Catholic that we're not exposed to Protestant faith, even though we're very respectful, just that we don't see it here in our daily life, And so it's so enriching to see that we always thought how as you don't have images in your churches, that I didn't come to think that obviously that has a problem for the arts, because then the art weren't developed. But on the other hand, I found that nowadays, as Protestant churches have become like sometimes cultural centers, because it's a way of bringing in people, and arts is becoming really the tool to attract people. And I've seen some, like Salisbury Cathedral, for example, they do incredible art installations on faith, so that people may have an experience of God, and then once they're there, then they go to a service, then they get a preaching, then that actually they are using art as a way of attracting people to the church.
I think so that can sometimes have its own pitfalls. Where I had a quote on the previous slide this last one. In the 19th century, the journalist Matthew Arnold said that much of what now passes as religion will be replaced, he said, by poetry. But we can say art. He was wrong about poetry replacing religion. It might still. No, it won't. But we can see in some forms how art has become a sort of replacement. And what we find in England is that a lot of people come and attend evensong because it's so beautiful and the choir is so beautiful, but there is no preaching of the word and there's no Christian practice that goes along with it. So ultimately these two have to be brought together again. It's great that people are coming to the churches and experiencing something beautiful, but yeah, one does need the word preached as well. You know.
As there is goodness and sin, do you think there is good art and sinful God art? Or because whether, as you explained, whether you like it or not, everything that's from God, whatever you're doing. Oh no. The question was, as there is goodness and sin, do you think there is can make a distinction between good art and sinful or bad art? Or as explained before, as everything that's from God, whether you like it or not, or your conscience is not, it is an expression of God, whatever you try to do with that.
Yes. Well, I think here again is a reason why I admire Hans Rookmaaker's work. Is he didn't just say it's all good, it's beautiful, there's meaning in everything. He said it's very important for us to identify what are the underlying messages that are being proclaimed through these things. But not just to say it's sin and therefore avoid, but he said let's engage, let's understand, let's see what statements are being made through this art. So it's not about distancing, but about coming, when we're in public square, it's about coming closer. Art made for the church is a different story. That there we have to be much more careful and be sure that they avoid a kind of heretical or blasphemous depiction. But art in the public square, that's our place to say, we can engage on the ideas being presented here. Rookmaaker had that Francis Bacon painting on the cover of his book, and in his book he would go on to say what Bacon does is he really disfigures the human form, and that this essentially is a way to degrade humanity as the image of God, and so there's a critique there. And I think there is definitely a place for critique and for saying, actually we disagree with the message being brought across.
So I think it's very interesting when you're saying that you don't make art for evangelistic something that it's more like open the door or the window to the other person to search. And I think it's very, very interesting. And nowadays, I think it's I feel it's the way to search and look for new believers.
Non-believers.
Yeah. Because I think there's such a when you look at a certain image that it's like Catholic or very Christian, many people have this thought and they just throw away the idea to open the door or the window or your mind to that type of art. So I think it's very interesting when you're talking about doing or thinking different ways, not that direct. Yeah.
Yeah, that's truth, but tell it slant, tell it a bit sideways. And when we're in the public square, that's often what we need to do. If you're just going to go, you need to turn from your sins, that's not going to translate. You need to speak
It's not
it.
good marketing.
No. But again, I don't think that our ultimate goals needs to always be aiming to convert people. But you can say, I'm showing off the beauty and depth of God's creation.
Yeah, I think it's completely like what you're saying. It's I'm just showing my passion. That this is my passion and this is what I like. This is what it makes me do and live in, you know. So I think like the point of view is completely different because you're just showing your vocation, tu vocación, your vocation.
Yeah.
And it's not like you have to do this. It's like the other way around.
And I would also say the other side is that doesn't mean that you need to hide your faith in your work. That if we take the case of philosophy, there was a movement in philosophy, I think it was in the 90s, but philosophers like Alvin Plantinga in America, they were doing such good philosophy from a Christian perspective that it couldn't be ignored. Even if people said, oh, you know, I'm not a Christian, it was so good, it was so challenging that people had to pay attention. And I think as Christians we can say, well, we have a lot to draw from in our Christian tradition. Let me make the best work that I can, drawing on the resources of my faith. And people can't ignore that. So yes, you have to be clever in how you approach the art world. And I can just imagine how challenging that can be. But I think it's both. You don't have to just evangelize through your art, but also you don't hide your source.
Thank you very, very much. I'm simply amazed. I don't know what to ask. But I will be very pleased to hear a bit of your poetry or your music.
So which way are you a musician?
I'm a singer-songwriter. Now, I haven't written much music in the past 2 years, but in South Africa I used to play with my band, and I think in my music I try to sort of tell its large. I have an album that reflects broadly on the Gospels, this idea of you've now discovered the truth and you would give anything up to follow that path. And so I have an album that sort of reflects on that, and it was very fun.
Was there a Christian song that you might have written, or a Christian pop song?
I wouldn't call it a Christian song, but it's a song about my Christianity. Yeah. So there's a song called Winter Tree. I mean, it's online.
Can we put it?
Yeah.
But not the music. we can.
Can we listen to it?
Yes. Now you're going to reveal my Spotify album.
I mean, I can go elsewhere, but you said
So what's the, tell us a little bit about this song that you wrote.
Hay un tema con
This song
después
is
que nos pueden bajar el
Winter
video,
Tree.
así que lo vamos a mutear. Sí, o sea que se vea, pero no que se escuche.
Quite a few years. Tree. Never been in bloom. I always fall too soon. It's thinking about my own week. quite fun about that was because my lyrics are kind of slant, they're almost like parables. And then people would come to me and say, "What do you mean by what girl are you talking about?"
Yeah.
And then I had this opportunity to unpack it, and then it was very interesting to people because they didn't understand what I was talking about.
¿Alguien más tiene alguna pregunta? Tenemos aquí una estrella.
Bueno, gracias por sus palabras, gracias por el proyecto.
Thank you for your words and thank you for your project.
Como profesora ahora de patrimonio eclesiástico,
I'm a teacher of ecclesiastical patrimony.
me gustaría saber su opinión sobre esa herencia cultural donde se pone de manifiesto
I want
precisamente
to,
esos valores.
I would like to have your opinion on
Es decir, que demuestra, o sea, es decir, que a lo largo de la historia se han tenido en cuenta
through history has been taken into account.
sí, visiones, por ejemplo, pues desde, es decir, la fe,
Visions such
la fe, la creencia en Cristo y en la religión y todo lo que es la creencia espiritual en felicidad.
faith and the belief in Christ and the Christian culture.
Bien, esa es una pregunta. Y la segunda es si conoce a un gran
Do
teólogo
you know a great theologian?
y si lo habéis estudiado, que es Baltasar, Hans Rookmaaker,
Have you studied him?
el cual, tomando referencia, como sabes, era un gran músico.
He was a great musician,
También pensaba que muchas veces los artistas que no son,
and I thought that many times the artists that are not,
sí, como Mozart, o como
like
datos que no practican, no son
some that were
cristianos,
not Christian,
al final
how at the end
están tocados de alguna
they're
manera
touched
por la mano de Dios.
by the hand of God.
La primera no la primera.
No hemos entendido la primera pregunta.
La primera
The first question was
es sobre el patrimonio eclesiástico,
About-
sobre la herencia
about the
del
heritage,
arte,
about
del
the
arte,
heritage of art in the
sobre la
patrimony.
herencia cultural del patrimonio eclesiástico.
First talk about the Balthasar.
Okay, well, I actually haven't studied from Balthasar very well. I mean, he's a mathematician. He's very good. He writes huge books, and I haven't.
A bit. I'm not much about it.
We're going to ask you.
No.
I mean, the one thing that I've picked up from Balthasar is that he talks about us who believe in God. We are the ones who can proceed from a place of wonder. That we look at the world and we can be in awe. We can experience gratefulness. We know that it's a gift and it comes from somewhere. And so he basically says that in this world, where things are given, it doesn't come from someone, it just is. We are the ones who are preserving wonder for the world. And our art can be beautifully informed if it proceeds from a place of wonder and gratefulness as opposed to just taking it for granted. And that is great strength, and it can lead to beautiful art if you proceed from wonder. I think a lot of artists now who don't have faith proceed from wonder, but there isn't so much of a reason for that wonder. It's often sort of, it's the kind of artist that doesn't think that much about what they do, they just do it because they love it. But the more thinking artists tend to, if they don't have a Christian faith, they tend to become more sort of darker and more morbid.
Otherwise it doesn't have structure.
Yeah.
And then she was asking about the patrimony of the heritage of the church. I would say in Basel twice. ¿Qué queréis contar a nivel desde el lado protestante?
Sí. Si tienen en cuenta, es decir, que no el arte, es cierto que el arte contemporáneo también tiene que trabajar, pero si ellos dentro de esos asociación indagan o tienen en cuenta la herencia cultural del arte cristiano?
Now, in Artway, do you take into consideration the heritage of, let's say, history of art
Yes.
and the heritage of the artistic culture? I think rather not only contemporary art, but
Mm.
Ya
also
configurarlo de una
Yeah, very much. I think actually that I have to guard against just writing about the old art because it's so beautiful and it's so filled with the gospel and is rich. I have to make sure that we write about contemporary art because we need to encourage good art today. We need to be engaged with what's being done today. But on Artway we write a lot about older art, especially in the Protestant world. There's a big patron in the arts in the United States. Her name is Roberta Amundsen, and she led a pilgrimage of principals of different colleges from Jerusalem through Italy, through Europe, all the way to England to show them, look, this is actually your heritage as a Christian. Look at these churches. Look at how they proclaim God's glory. So this thing is coming into the evangelical world, and she's pointing out, look, the church architecture is reflecting the theology. This is the idea of heaven on earth. This is the idea of you don't even need to explain that, but yeah. So Artway does engage with the history of art, and especially there's another important guy who we have an interview on Otto that we recently published. It's with Roberta Amundsen and Ben Quash. Ben Quash set up a program in London where they study theology and art, but they have a partnership with the National Gallery. So the students go to the gallery every week and they are shown the link between the Christian faith and these great works of art. Because I once heard someone say that a lot of galleries are essentially graveyards for artworks, because these are artworks that used to be above the altar, and now it's hanging on this wall with no context. It's up to Christians to point out again, no, this is why this artwork is so full of meaning, because this is what it would have meant to someone in the 17th century, 15th century, 14th century. So this is another place where Christian scholarship is re-entering an important place within scholarship, because there's a recognition that you cannot understand a Christian artwork if you don't take the Christian story into account.
that we're very lucky because the director of the National Gallery, he's an incredible human being, and he's Catholic, and he's a very committed Christian. Yes, incredible, and lovely person, right? I really know him, and he really wants to integrate not only traditional old masters also with contemporary art, and he brings in contemporary pieces that play and converse with the old masters as a way of theology to the visitors. And he wants to use the space, because he was telling us, we were with him in Rome a month ago, and he was saying that in a way his problem is that, I don't know if he said something like 70% of his public that go to the National Gallery are perhaps Asian or non-practicant atheists, and he says, how can I show Christian work, which is really the most of what he has in masters, to Asian public that have no idea about Christianity, and that's why also it's his point on teaching on Christian art through the works of art in the National Gallery. So he does a mission, he does public theology.
Yes.
Public theology.
Yes.
Thank you for everything, for all of this. It was really great to listen to you. Excuse my absolute blatant ignorance. on Protestantism, but that is why I'm asking this question. Because I would love to know what your opinion and your point of view is. What do you think about the idea that maybe even, well not maybe, but that we can become saints by doing everything in our daily life, and even art, like, as one of the main things as artists, but also in the little tasks of our daily life, that we can become saints and get to heaven in like a very holy way, an absolutely holy way. I would like to know your opinion from the Protestant point of view.
Great question.
Great person.
Yeah. So I think Protestants tend to emphasize the priesthood of all believers. That if you are in Christ, you have His righteousness, and you no longer think of how righteous am I? Am I a saint? Am I not a saint? For Protestants, the Reformation very much emphasized that we need to move away from thinking that our works do anything for us, to saying the only thing that matters is that your faith is in Christ. Now, that obviously moved in some negative ways, like there's a sort of stream of theology known as antinomianism, the idea that what you do doesn't matter, as long as you pray and Bible study everything, that's fine. But no, the Protestant idea is essentially that when you put your faith in Christ, you receive His righteousness. There's nothing more you can do, nothing more you can add. And you live out of a place of gratefulness, and you now do the works of Christ because He is transforming you because of your faith in Him. So from a Protestant perspective, we don't think about, am I going to become a saint? Or how much of a saint am I going to become? It's much more, in the best versions of Protestantism, it is that I will be transformed into His likeness because of what He's doing in me, and I just need to trust Him. So, yeah, I think we wouldn't use the language of becoming a saint really, because you know, from Luther very much emphasized we're not saved by works, we're saved by grace. So a lot of Protestantism is all about do anything to avoid what we would call legalism. We don't want to ever fall into the deception that we can do something for ourselves in our own righteousness. It's all Christ's work. So yeah, this can be tricky for Protestants to then, but what role do my works then play? What role does working in the world then play for me as a Christian? So it's a very good question. It's a question to ask a Protestant, because Protestants need to do especially very hard work to think, okay, I've received Christ's righteousness, so why do anything? And Rookmaaker is starting to address that by saying, well, God's creation is good. He created me not to leave the world, but to be part of His recreation project. A steward of the earth, yes, exactly. So I don't need to become something other than a human being. I need to become fully a human being as I was created to be, and therefore I make art. Therefore I look after creation. Therefore I build roads, or I garden, or whatever the case may be. Yes, that's a great question.
That's actually great what you just said, because we're not too far apart then. Because as Catholics, from a Catholic point of view, we also cannot do anything without God's grace. We can't do anything good without God's grace. That's why we have the sacraments and why you need to receive them to receive the grace.
Yeah.
And you have to live within God, through God, and with God. And that, from what you said, will translate them into our actions. But we have to be conscious about it and look for it.
Yes.
So then we're not that far.
Yeah. I think obviously the emphasis on sacrament is bigger in Catholicism. A lot of Protestantism, the sacraments are just a symbol, but what really matters is what you believe. I'm an Anglican. For me, the sacraments are very important. But there are a lot of Protestants that would think, well, sacraments don't have that much to do with your righteousness.
Hi, thank you for all these works. I have a question, and it's as Anglican, maybe it's easy for you to explain, but what's your vision of the artistic value of the Holy Mass, like Catholic Mass or Orthodox Mass or Anglican Mass? Because at the end it's very similar, or they got the same rituals or new. And the comparison with some Protestant churches that there are nothing artistic. I mean, for example, is the chapel and the preacher and the believing God or you will burn in hell, and have nothing. And some have music, but others have nothing. As my question to you is, as a theologian and an artist, how do you see the artistic value of the Mass?
He needs you.
Okay, give me an
That's
answer.
one. It's very interesting to have Elizabeth also participating in the
Let's hear the taxes.
Okay, Elizabeth.
Como he explicado, Elizabeth es su mujer, llevan 6 meses casados, y ella ha hecho un máster en teología y arte en St. Andrews en Escocia. Entonces justamente está especializada en teología y arte. Entonces me parece que y también es protestante. Entonces me parece muy interesante también una pregunta para que se pueda ayudar. I think it's great that you both answer these questions now as Protestants to us. That we're very needy to hear you.
So you're getting a very specific Protestant answer now, which is from an Anglican, and for me, I've moved much more towards an appreciation of the sacrament, especially the Holy Sacrament of communion. And that is for those reasons that I mentioned earlier, is that I got to the point where I realized that our church service seemed to be all about the head. It just speaks to what you think. But then that's kind of an enlightenment way of thinking, that what I am is what I think. But I started realizing that I can think all the right things and still do the wrong things. So what does that mean? The whole of you needs to be sanctified and changed. And so the artistic value of the liturgy, I think of the liturgy as almost like a hyper symbol. It is, we can do a lot of things that are symbolic indeed, but those things cannot really reach the depth of the liturgy because it incorporates so much. It has the story of Christ, it has the story of Israel, it has our own stories, it has the passion story, all wrapped into one. And then obviously the sort of procession towards the Eucharist, that is something that cannot be replaced by just preaching, in my opinion. But your point is a good one, because I do think that a lot of Protestant churches have replaced all of that with just preaching. And it comes down to what we think church is for. So if you ask a lot of Protestants what is church for, they would say it's to proclaim the word of God. But what then about encountering Christ? What about Christ's presence among us? And so there is a real problem there, and that book that I mentioned earlier by James K. Smith, he's a Dutch Reformed Christian, and he's writing about how head knowledge is not enough, thinking is not enough, your senses need to be addressed, your whole being needs to encounter Christ. We approach it in different language, but I do think that evangelical Christianity is moving towards a higher appreciation of liturgy, well, even if it's very slow.
background is African.
Have you read the book?
From Swiss Holland.
No, it's
La
the
Gran Cordero de-
the last.
The Lancia.
Oh,
Supper of the Lamb. Supper of the
Supper of
Lamb.
the Lamb. I haven't read it yet. It's the last
Yeah,
part.
yeah.
My friend of mine recommended it last week.
It's for me the best book that makes me the Catholic monk.
Yeah.
Scott Hahn is the writer.
Scott Hahn.
Scott Hahn is an Anglican.
He also wrote Philosophy of Rome or something
Yes.
like that. But he was not He was
That was Protestant. Not Anglican.
I think I would like to repeat the question to you, Elizabeth, about how do you find saint? How the path to be a saint? I think that was a great question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to give a great answer. I think a good job of it. But when you, I might want to ask further, like, because I'll just show my very Protestant background. I think I would ask, like, what do you mean by becoming a saint? How do you describe that? And so what do you reckon?
When in the scripture God says to be perfect,
Yes.
like, was it Jesus who said it? It was Jesus who said it, like, be perfect, like your Holy Father is perfect. That is sainthood.
Okay.
Perfect in terms
Yeah.
of love.
Of course.
Okay.
Like not perfect in like a human way.
Okay.
Because we're never perfect.
Then repeat your question. That was so good.
Okay, so the question is, what is your view and your opinion on the fact that we can become saints by doing our daily life?
Yeah.
That's
Okay. Yes. Yeah, I think, as Otto said, like, I wouldn't perhaps think of it or use the language the same way, but I think the general principle is still there very much in all of our, and I think this is interesting because, yes, Protestantism perhaps went a bit too far sometimes, and they emphasize so much, and it is by grace alone, works not happening. But of course, in the Epistle of James, you will see that there's James talks quite a bit about how show me your faith by your works, that your works have an absolute influence to what you do. And I think, as Otto was also saying, like what we do here on earth, and that it's not just our lives here on earth, don't matter in terms of sometimes. This is oftentimes some of the theology that's part of my upbringing. But I think over time, I've seen much more of that.
I think we are very much aligned in that
Yeah,
sense,
exactly.
because sainthood in reality is the perfection is being in total unison to God's will
Yeah, exactly.
in your life.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
that's sainthood.
Yeah.
So it's exactly what you
Yeah.
said, you know.
Yeah.
How you internalize Christ in yourself, and then naturally,
Yes.
if that's true, naturally that will be good deeds.
Yeah.
You know, you cannot be psychopathic.
Yes.
I'm truly God, but I do these deeds.
Yeah.
Cannot be.
Exactly. And I think one of the ways too, like, thinking about if Christ lives in us, then we are now participating in a greater story and the redemption of all things. We follow in the pattern of Christ, and we follow in his resurrection and making, we're part of making all things new. So in that sense, I think that becoming perfect, as Christ is perfect, what that looks like, I'll not probably have any conception of for my whole life, it's in progress. But it's, being transformed from glory to glory, and that's what I think is so beautiful about this community, that you take seriously your vocation, your work in the arts, but then your work outside of that as being something that brings Christ every day. And in that sense, I think that that is the kind of what you think
participating in that bigger story and yeah.
Just to bring a kind of technical point to it, it's that, again, we would use different language. It's that the Protestants, we are being sanctified, we are being conformed to the image of Christ, but our holiness comes from Christ alone. So is that we have His holiness, not our own, and we are being conformed into His image. So we mean the same thing. We just say different things.
Yeah, but we need to open up to His holiness. I mean,
Yes.
that's the problem. It's not just He gives it to us, but what am
Yeah.
I doing
Yes.
to accept it and to show it?
Yeah. And I mean, in that regard, spiritual practice is becoming much more emphasized in Protestantism again. Contemplative prayer is becoming more popular amongst Protestants now.
How do you do contemplative prayer?
I practice the Jesus prayer, so it's Ignatian spirituality. So yeah, so silent prayer, and obviously all the other things like fasting and so on. Fasting has always been, I think, a Protestant practice, but things like
How do you fast or when do you fast? Sorry.
as Anglicans we fast in late.
Us too, I didn't know that you fasted.
Yeah, so Anglicans look very Catholic very often.
It's more than Catholic. I had a friend of mine who was Presbyterian,
Yeah.
and he fasted once a month. Doesn't matter if it was Lent or whatever.
Yeah, and so the more Reformed Christians, they don't like calendars so much because they feel it's it's prescriptive.
When the Holy Spirit tells you.
Yeah. So it's all about it must be spontaneous and I need it. I'm so devoted to Christ that I fast on my own decision, not because the church calendar tells me to. And that's so that sense of my own choice is very important to a lot of Protestants. So we're Anglicans, we like the church calendar. But
we did. None of us grew up that way.
Yeah.
So like, that wasn't at all a part of my upbringing. But I was introduced to Anglicanism and introduced to the church calendar, and then I thought, oh my goodness, why hasn't this been around for my whole life? Like, it's just such a beautiful way of participating in the story of God. And then, I mean, in how we are brought into it here. So I mean, that's one of my favorite things now, and I think I'm quite the
And also like Holy Communion, no?
yeah, exactly. So, and I think Lent especially is such a special time because it strips so much back over you, and it really draws you to prayer, it draws you to realizing what you want to feel so quickly with something else, and it brings you to these connections. So, yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing. It is amazing how many similarities actually align between very different baptisms and backgrounds. Okay, well, I think I won't pressure you more. Thank you so much.
El momento en el
I think we invite them to the observatorio and see.
Yo creo que sí. Espera, perdón, es que están con el tema de los papeles. Sí, ya está.